Welcome, everybody. It's great to have you here, to have those of you who are here. We are today having the second of our FID faculty transformation conversations. The FID Transformation Forum has really been taking the time since around about the middle of the year to think through what it wants to do in terms of transformation, in terms of the university transformation policy and transformation mandate against Vision 2030 and now against Vision 2020 and now against Vision 2030. And what we've done this year has been to host two conversations, and this is the second one. And the decision was made to adopt a conversational approach so that colleagues could share their experiences, could share their learnings, could share perhaps what's worked for them, sometimes in quite concrete and against the background of the theory that they might be working with. So today we've got Amanda Morris and Sisanda and Nkoala in conversation with each other. And the conversation is about transformative approaches to using language in teaching and learning. I'm going to hand over at this stage to my colleagues to take over from here. Thank you very much, Sisanda and Amanda. Look forward to what you have to say.
Thank you very much, Janet, and thank you very much, colleagues, for coming through. I think Janet has summed up our intention very well in that we're wanting to have a conversation with each other and with you because, transformation is a process and we are all on a journey. And our orientation this afternoon isn't to present as experts, but as people who are thinking about language in particularly as a tool for transformation, and to bring you in on the conversation to maybe hear and get reflections from you about the things that you've been doing with language in your teaching and in the learning that's happening in your classrooms. So we're going to start off with Amanda sharing what she has been doing, particularly with translanguaging. And I'll ask some questions in relation to the work that she's been doing after she's given a short presentation. And then we hope to bring you in on the conversation as well to just hear if anything that we have discussed resonates with you, if there are things that you can share about what you have done that's worked. And yeah, we'll see how the conversation goes. So Amanda, I'll hand over to you to share your screen and then we can get started. Amanda?
Sorry, I forgot to unmute.
My computer is frozen, so I'm just going to log off as you present and then come back on so that I don't have glitches when we actually start chatting.
Okay, sure. So I'm seeing a red border around my screen here, so I'm assuming that everyone can see my presentation. So just to say that today, more than anything else, I have a presentation purely because I think when one's online, you want something to look at least. But yeah, like Sisanda said, it's really just a chat and me sharing what I've done. I am by no means a linguist, so this is just things that I've tried out in my classroom to see how I can assist students. Yeah, so maybe a little bit around what we've left out in the blurb around today is my context. And I teach specifically in the extended curriculum program in design. And the little paragraph that you see on the screen there is something we've worked on recently, which is what our HOD calls our why. So more than it is about what we do, it's why we do it. And so we work with those of you who are familiar with extended curriculum programs will know students who are underprepared for university study. And within design specifically, we're saying we give these students designerly ways of knowing, doing, and being, but also in a collaborative way towards the completion of their diplomas. And in this case, it's a diploma in either fashion, jewelry, product, or visual communication design. And so what I'll be talking about today, which also wasn't mentioned specifically in the blurb around the seminar today, is translanguaging. And translanguaging is a complex term, but the word in itself, if one looks at it etymologically, it's the initial concept based around bilingual students or even bilingual learners at school. But this idea of moving between languages and also your language repertoire. So it's the idea of not seeing language as or languages as monolingual, so not seeing them as separate entities, but rather as tools and a repertoire as such that one uses and moves between, hence the trans, and that you language as a verb almost. And so because of who our students are, we often find that English is a second or third language. And so we ask the question around, when they process, when they work their way through the knowledge areas or the knowledges that we work our way through in the curriculum, when they process those concepts or those ideas, there's often this question around what language it happens in. So what's happening in the process, and then what we expect them to produce or to communicate to us, which is often
AirPods aren't connecting, sorry.
In English. So, Nikki, I think you forgot to mute your mic. Okay, so yeah, so this is just a quote from Garcia, 2012. So this idea of translanguaging supports the ability of bilingual, and in this case, in my classroom, multilingual, often students to have multiple identities, and for them to not exactly be like the monolingual context, which we often find university to be, but then to strengthen and to affirm the multiple identities and also the fluid identities that our students often hold when they present themselves at university. So in terms of the context of this particular part of my curriculum, it lives in the subject that we call academic and professional literacy. Essentially, it's one week of activity that we do within the year. And before they go through they will have done reading for comprehension. See the top right of the slide. I refer back to what the previous exercise was, which was reading for comprehension, and how they find ways to make meaning of texts when presented with whatever kind of text it is at university. So one things they do there is to look at finding words that they don't understand and then what to do when they find those words. One thing, of course, that all students are told is that they look up these words in the English dictionary. And so the question I asked them at this point is whether that actually, whether it helps, because it's still in English. So they're still looking in English in an English dictionary. And then we have a conversation around what we do then with those English words when they still don't make sense to us. And so I asked them the question around what language is in their head. So when they think about things and when they process ideas or concepts, whether they can pinpoint which language that happens in. So the key thing to understand for them here is that once they've made meaning in whichever language or in whichever way they do that, essentially with us being or using English as the language of learning and teaching, they have to bring that back into what they're currently doing. And so what I'm providing them with in the session is just a way in which they can do that. So then the next thing is when they get an instruction or a process is explained in class, I ask them about whether or not they understand what they do when they don't understand. And then, of course, we have a chat around a strategy that they could possibly use. So this is one of many strategies that students are offered. And then we talk about translanguaging, which is switching, but not just switching, but also blending languages to help with understanding concepts. So what they then ask to do, I mean, eventually they go and then in groups of 2, they partner up with someone who has a mother tongue as them, and then they look at their current assignments, find a concept that they're struggling with or which they find difficult to understand, and they have a discussion around what it means. So I asked them for this specific exercise to use their mother tongue and talk about those and the concepts and to try and help each other understand or make meaning. And then also once they've done that, to speak that back to each other in English. And that's, of course, if English is not their mother tongue. So they then record this, and this is what I sort of get to make sense of. Yeah, and so this is, I mean, it's a glimpse really in a much larger curriculum, but essentially subsequent to this as well, I asked them to reflect on the exercise and to tell me very specific things about what they learned, whether they learned anything, so not also assuming that they have learned something, and then also how they think they could apply it in future. And so this is one example of a reflection of a student. And then, yeah, just how she referenced that more than just in what we've done in this subject, she could see the value in how she could use this in other areas or in other subjects as well. Yeah, so a very brief glimpse of what I'm presenting today, but I think, yeah, I'll be a lot more interested in having the conversation rather than making just a presentation. So I think at this point, Sisanda, maybe I'll stop. Yeah.
Okay, thanks so much, Amanda. So I'm interested to just get context as the teacher, basically. What prompted you to take this approach? Was it something that happened incidentally, or did you identify an issue or a need and then deliberately set out to use translanguaging as part of your teaching?
So it's almost twofold. I think there's always been the informal sharing and but more of translation almost in class that happened among students. So I would often pick up, you know, when something, or when I was trying to explain something or someone didn't understand something amongst each other, would explain to each other, and that explanation often would happen between the students who share a mother tongue, you know, so they'd make sense of concepts by explaining it or by working through it along with each other in their mother tongue. But then also for myself, I mean, I'm only bilingual. I speak Afrikaans as my first language and then English as well. Often I don't have what is needed to help students make meaning of particular concepts. So I was also interested in finding ways in which they can help each other, especially those being ways often in which I cannot help them. So it was, yeah, it was sort of multifaceted, the why I started doing it, yeah.
And as someone who doesn't speak Xhosa or Sesotho or Tshivenda, how, as a lecturer, do you then make peace with not knowing what the students are discussing and what kind of learning is happening, and actually just trust that learning is happening?
Yeah, it's I mean, I laugh, but it's quite it's a leap to make, because one has to let go of, and it's a challenge in terms of the power dynamics that often exist in classrooms. And I think Garcia writes about how often when students are bilingual or multilingual, that the other language is almost villainized, you know, it's sometimes even banned. So I've heard lecturers say things like English only, please, you know, when students start speaking vernacular, they speak in their own mother tongue and they don't know what they are saying. So there's a lot of trust, and one has to trust students and give them also some of the responsibility in terms of the community of learning. So it is challenging because and it's also very scary because you don't know if they are telling each other the right thing. But one almost has to trust that in the process of doing it, whether they are maybe sometimes miscommunicating concepts, they are still acquiring knowledge around the skill of how to work through concepts with their peers, with fellow students, but then also how to move between and use what they have, what we require of them. And it's something that's interesting with translanguaging because you're giving away power. So it's also it's a social justice tool as well. It's a restorative thing, and a lot of that stuff we all know is very uncomfortable. So it's not easy to give away that power and to trust students. And so with the submission of these voice recordings or voice notes, half the time I didn't know what students were saying. But for me, the key thing was to have them having gone through the activity that way, trusting that they had, if nothing else, acquired the skill of working their way through concepts from the known into the unknown. Yeah.
Just to get a sense from colleagues in the room, does anybody else use translanguaging, and how have you navigated the fact that there may be languages that students want to bring into their learning that you don't necessarily speak? Does anybody want to share maybe based on the experiences colleagues have had with translanguaging, if anybody else uses it in their teaching? Yesterday or earlier this week, I was in another context where a colleague was talking about what the move to online learning has meant, and the dynamic of being in online spaces where students are using different languages, and you're in that space with students, and the conversation is happening in a language that you don't understand. So I think it's something that even if you don't necessarily do it intentionally, the move to online learning, not to online learning, but to these virtual communities is definitely bringing it in, because people, that's how our students speak with each other. And if we find ourselves in the spaces that they're in, it's something that, yeah, we're going to get exposed to a lot more. What you're projecting now, Amanda, is it an assessment that you want to speak to, or what is on the screen? Hi, Amanda. Am I still audible, colleagues?
Oops, sorry.
Okay.
No, it's just another of student feedback.
Okay. So talk us through what the students say about how this approach is transformative for them, because we've looked at an element of what it means for you and the power dynamic that it shifts for you as an academic. For students, what does it mean?
I think in terms of the feedback that one got, there are two things that you hold. It's sort of your intention with what you're doing, but then also what students actually get out of it. So with the learning that you've intended actually happens. And I think often that has been apparent in what students were saying. I think that I showed the very first feedback from students that is very apparent. And so I think for students, and in my past, and I've done quite a few things where I've experimented with how I use language in the classroom. So I would have done things like, for example, translating assignment briefs into all three sort of languages that are the most spoken in the Western Cape. So, and in those cases, often the feedback was, but no, you know, we want it in English. And so there's this idea, and I think it's also again linked to what Garcia references as the privileging of English in our case, as the, you know, that English is the pinnacle. And I think what happens in Sisanda and what has happened for some students is that they realize that there's value in what they have. So there's value in their mother tongue, there's value, and can actually in their transition, which is key for our students, you know, in the foundation year of the extended curriculum program, that they see the value of the tools that they already hold, or it's not just being erased when they come to university, but that it can be used as a valuable tool to get them to speak. And it's important for them to eventually get to the language that they need to have a command of at university and also in design. But it for them, as the student references, you know, in my recent history assignment, since these theory subjects have long unfamiliar words, she's discovered now some that she has a very, very good grasp of. And that's the thing, that with their mother tongue or their home language, they know it, they spoke it, it's what they shared with their siblings, with their parents. And so it's very familiar, and that's a very key component of moving into what is often very unfamiliar. So I think that's the transformative value for students, is to understand that what they have or what they come with is very valuable in getting to this, what we call in our why, the successful completion of their design qualification. So I think that's one of the aspects.
Mm-hmm. And what do you say of the view that it's all good and well to expose students and allow them to use different languages in the context of learning, but in industry, whatever that means, or in the world, or English is the language that they will be using, it's the language of the economy, and it doesn't help for them to have learned or use these isiXhosa or Sesotho terms when they go out into the world. It's an English dominated space.
I would say that was only because language is seen as monolingual, you know, that languages are seen as mutually exclusive, but language, and especially in terms of translanguaging, is seen as interrelated. So anyone who comes from a bilingual home, I do it myself. I speak Afrikaans to my husband, and my kids speak English, and then we speak English to them, but we speak Afrikaans to each other. Will understand that it's a lot more complex, and that I think within the context of South Africa, in any workplace or in any economy, you encounter a diverse range of people. And so I think that those who say that the world is English, that there may be monolingual perspective, but the world that I live in and the world that I see currently is a lot more complex and a lot more interrelated. And so the trans part in trans language is really the thing that.
No, just bought the proper.
Rainer, you had your hand up. Do you want to ask a question?
Thanks, Sisanda.
Make a comment.
Yeah, maybe a comment. I think the transformation in the language agenda has been tried to be, or we've tried to address it at a number of different levels, at faculty and departmental levels. And I think the biggest stumbling block, especially for departments within the built environment spheres, is that unless industry changes, which is predominantly English, and these can be, whether it's reports one would need to write, or meetings with sites on clients, or general meetings, or even if you look at the standards that are against the professions, the professional bodies in themselves, is that we can provide all of the opportunities here, but industry is going to revert back to English. And I think at some point we need to start engaging outside, because no matter what we do here is not going to materialize to benefit the student once he or she enters industry. And that's just a comment from my side.
Thanks, Raina. Does anybody want to speak to that comment? Janet, you have your hand up.
Yeah, it is also a kind of an observation, and again coming from my perspective, from the coaching world, and from seeing the importance of soft skills. And I wondered, it kind of connects to what Raina was saying in some ways, but it's really a question for Amanda, and my guess would be that translanguaging would have quite a profound impact on students' sense of belonging, and it really would be play a significant role in building inclusivity. And I wondered what the impact is on students' self-confidence to then go out into industry, to given that there's that the project that you're doing, or the way that you're teaching at the moment, you're also still asking students to they're still working back into English at some point. But do you have any sense of the impact on students' self-confidence, on perhaps on the softer side of being kind of resilient and a confident student, Amanda?
Sorry, colleagues, I don't even know when I cut off with my network, but to respond to you, Janet, like I said before, it's a glimpse into a much larger curriculum that's also only a year out of 4 years in which they will complete their diploma. And we do this for a week, so it's a small part of a much bigger plan within this subject. But I do think, and it's been my experience, and this is now completely anecdotal, my observation, that having the opportunity to bring parts of who they are into the classroom is extremely good for their confidence as students in general. So having that recognition and that visibility in terms of who they are, and having that recognized, is a crucial part of making them feel welcome and part of the university, and therefore creates the almost not accountability, but maybe I'll use that word for lack of a better term, in terms of participating and making sure that they also then do those things that they should to be successful. But then in terms of their confidence, I think it does give them a boost, because one of, again, and this has been my observation, what often hampers students' participation is a lot of the challenges with regards to language, and sometimes to their own detriment. So I think welcoming who they are and what they bring with them in the classroom is very valuable. But of course, this is a small part of a much larger picture. So the effects as graduates, I wouldn't be able to comment on. I don't know if I've answered your question.
Thanks. Yes.
Rion, your hand is up.
Hi there. I would just like to add, is that I feel, as a bilingual person myself, that allowing students that time to bring in their home language or different languages allows them to understand things that in English they might not initially grasp. So if we're thinking about future, we must also remember that the industry or the business world being English might not actually be where they intend on going. They might actually, because we're also driving people to go out and create their own businesses. And if we don't, and I think it's important that we start this process here to transform so that the world outside can also then transform. Thank you.
And if I could maybe, Sisanda, just comment on what Rian said, because I don't know when I was cut off with my connection. Part of what I was saying earlier, I don't know how much of that you heard, was that the view, and Janet, I think, touched on it as well by saying I do get them to speak it back in English. And it's purely because that's what's expected at university. So giving them the ability to feed that back. But I think that those who say the world of business and the world out there is English are saying it from their own very monolingual perspective. So I think the world that I see is a lot more diverse. It's a lot more interrelated, and it is actually a lot more welcoming of multiple ways into being a professional.
Yeah, I'd also like to come in on that because just from my perspective with journalism, I mean, we say the world of business is English, but is it really? I think we often are thinking of an aspect of industry and an aspect of business. The majority of South Africans, who most of our students will probably end up servicing, being clients or in whatever aspect, whether you are in health, in media, even in IT, the end person who your skill or your product aims to reach in our context is most probably multilingual. So I think thinking about where the skills our students are learning will eventually end up is something that I think because transformation is not just transformation of higher education, but it's of our society as a whole, with higher education really playing a role in helping mold the kind of professions and professionals we want to see in South Africa. So it can be quite limiting to think of industry as the people in the boardrooms who speak English when there's a whole population out there that is multilingual. I'm also interested. There's a Zina, your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, apologies firstly for arriving late. I had another meeting I had to attend to. So I'm coming in at the end of the conversation. But just to add to the point that you've just made, I think that when we considering, language, it's more than just language. It's also about how we create those exclusionary spaces. And I don't want to use the word inclusionary, because by referring to inclusionary, someone has to make the decision. Apologies, that's my dog. Someone has to make the decision around who gets included. And I think that when we adopt a binary approach to language, as in an either or, who decides what the or is going to be? And so I think it's really important that we do consider ways in which we do include aspects of multilingualism and translanguaging in our delivery of the curriculum, because it does open up the space as well to reconsider how we challenge power structures in learning and teaching and who ultimately decides, but also to open up the space and recognize that there's other ways of being a knowing, and that a boardroom is not typically just an English environment. and how do we actually also challenge those kinds of power structures? So it really is a transformative discussion and debate that needs to be had. And it's very interesting how our perspectives also informs our own practices and behaviors. So yeah, I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Sisanda, if I may, just on the last bit that Zina mentioned, how our own practices or our own, and I would say levels of comfortability influence what we allow or what we set the boundaries in our classrooms to be. I think that's also quite important to understand, that in often the transformation, and this is something that translanguaging, or Garcia says about translanguages, is that it's also transformative for us as the teacher or as the lecturer, in that, and it's something that I mentioned earlier, it challenges our own perceptions around what is okay, what's comfortable. And a lot of the English-only mentality comes from what we are comfortable with, and not what's always the best or good for engagement with our students. So that's something that we as academics need to acknowledge, that a lot of that sits within what we are comfortable with, and that we also are part of the transformational process that takes place when we employ these methods. Yeah.
Just to, again, put it out to colleagues to try and get your perspectives, because this is supposed to be, I've noted you, Nike, supposed to be sort of a three-way conversation, Amanda, myself, and everybody else. What challenges do you face if you've tried to use translanguaging or tried to use multilingual pedagogies in your teaching? What challenges have you faced that have either made you backtrack or even prevented you from starting? Because, I mean, this is a great platform to maybe think through how to deal with those if colleagues have maybe gone through the same thing and managed to come up with a solution. So maybe you can think about that, and you can just share what experiences you have. In the meantime, Nike, I think your hand was up, and then Margaret, you can go after.
Hi, sorry, it's Nikki, just for the record, although everyone thinks it is Nike.
No, sorry.
It's good. I just wanted to follow up on what Zina was talking about with regards to the issues or the problems around inclusion, and Amanda talking about transformation. And I think the two can work together, because if it's inclusion in order to transform, then students will be including us in a sense, rather than us including them, by allowing or encouraging translanguaging to happen in pedagogical spaces. So I just wanted to say that, because I also kind of trip up on that word of inclusion, and then need to frame it differently in order to, yeah, I guess, to trouble it and to make sense of it. Thanks.
Thanks, Nikki. That's a very interesting point of students including us through being allowed to bring their languages in, not allowed, but the space being created for their languages to be used. Margaret?
Hi, I'm not necessarily answering your question, but I suppose where it does come in is that I'm sort of shamefully monolingual, and I do struggle with that because I've got so many languages in my classroom. So one of the things I have tried to do in orientation is I always work with language as sort of a icebreaker. They write down all sorts of phrases and words and a bit of slang in whatever language they want, and then they put it up on the wall. So that was the one thing I do. But then this year I decided to do something different in one of my projects. It's a practical liner cut project, and I made a scenario where they had it was a children's bookshop which translated children's books into many, many languages, and they had to design a little sort of packaging illustration for that. And there I said that, you know, there are many, many languages that in this hypothetical situation would be translated into. So you can actually name, and they worked with African animals, you can you need to have the name of the animal and the image of the animal in the design, and you can name it in any language that you like. And then you have to please tell me how to say it, because then it was quite interesting for me is that many people, most of them I probably did do English names, and then some of them did Xhosa and Afrikaans and so on. And some English-speaking students chose to do Xhosa, which I also thought was quite interesting. But that was just a little exercise I did to try and, I suppose, make up for the fact that I can't speak many languages. That was it.
Thanks, Margaret. Thanks for sharing. Anybody else want to share some strategies you've tried? It can be ones that didn't necessarily work out, because we often learn more from those.
So maybe to mention, Sisanda, if I may, just on what Margaret was saying is often, Margaret, what you mentioned is that some of them still did it in English. It's an interesting phenomenon, and that often happens when there's that sort of very strong bilingual feeling, and they have already attached a lot more value to English. And that was also my experience with translating some of my assessment or my assignment briefs, that there was this some students who strongly felt that, no, I'm at university, I want it in English, I don't want to speak my mother tongue. And so it's an interesting phenomenon because it does exist.
Yeah, no, I can also relate to that, Amanda. In a study that I did with a group of journalism students, there was the sense that even though they know they could have done better in an assignment if they had used another language, because it's university and this is the idea they have of how to be in a university space, they chose to use English. So Nikki, and then Janet, and then Nonkosi.
So I just want to share something I tried last year. No, sorry, the year before, when we were still doing face-to-face teaching, is I thought I would use Google Translate as an English speaker in the classroom. And it actually became a very good learning experience for all of us in the room because Google Translate is so poor. But what it did do, it was really funny because I couldn't tell because I only speak English. But within the students speaking whatever languages would then laugh and say, oh no, it means this, but actually it means that. And then by themselves, with each other and the poor Google Translate, they were able to kind of thrash out or refine what the concepts were that I was trying to teach, I guess. Yeah. So it was an exercise that failed, but actually ended up being successful, unexpectedly.
Great. Janet?
Sorry, I wanted to see if I could provoke anybody from the Faculty of Business to say something, because I think I heard in one of the seminars something interesting that they had done with the introduction of visual images with words, so kind of stepping into another language as well. And I also wanted to know, given the sort of institutional drive to create glossaries, these multilingual glossaries, and how slowly they are progressing, whether there was some way to, or some more creative way, or whether you think there's a creative way to make these perhaps more living processes or living documents, or some way of kind of harnessing student energy into something that's maybe more process driven. I just wondered what your thoughts were, if you had any on that, or if anybody has thoughts on that.
Okay, I'll leave it to the floor, Janet, and then maybe Amanda and I can speak to it if it doesn't come up closer to the end. But Nonkosi, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for such an important, in fact, it's a very transformative discussion. Mine is just, I'm just sharing the fact that as you are talking about you know, these beautiful experiences of how this trans-languaging or code switching of students in class. I just wanted to remind the colleagues that, you know, when we just did a survey of from students of diversity and inclusivity, and we just I was just so you know, quite excited when I look at how students look at language as intersecting, whether it's language in relation to culture, in relation to religion, in relation to others. And I was even saying sometimes to share those kind of survey that we've just done, because students have the same, because some of the questions were, how do you feel in class? Like you are, how do you feel there? I mean, do you feel a sense of belonging when you are in class, or a sense of acceptance and all kind of things? But my issue is just to say, maybe it is at one stage, maybe FID, we could even have a platform where I can also share those findings, because it will also assist your programs in also to check what students are saying on the ground and what else you need to take into consideration, because I see this as a very powerful tool for transformation. For me, I always say language is if you talk about transformation, that's where it starts, because it's about your identity, it's about also your understanding, even your transforming. In fact, it just is transformative in its form.
Mm-hmm.
So colleagues, I was just saying, maybe as part of our, I'm quite excited with FID, we will have that platform where we could share some of these surveys that are done, especially with language in relation to other inclusive, or let's say other diversity, intersecting with other diversity issues. Thanks, Sisanda. I was just sharing that survey for me, saying, you know, it can maybe add value to the work you do as well, which I'm very much excited with the work you do and with your colleague there. Thank you.
Thank you, Nonkosi. I think, yeah, it definitely sounds like something the forum can follow up, and Janet is in the room, so I'm sure she's made note of that. Junette, and then Rudolph and Shamila and Nikki.
Good afternoon, colleagues. I just wanted to say that, you know, in engineering, there was some kind of study done a few years ago where we tried to ascertain how students felt and how often they use the multilingual glossaries. And the findings were actually that students were not keen to use it because their argument was that when they go out into industry, they need to use the hegemonic language, which is English, you know. And so that raises one question, obviously, for us to engage on. But the question that I want to throw out, and I don't think it's something we can answer, is why are we putting the focus so much on the student without interrogating at which point we are going to require our staff to be able to speak another language? And so that is, for me, at the moment, a deficit. Staff, whether it's admin support or teaching, mostly speak one or two languages. And so for me, if we really are serious with advancing and building multilingualism and making other languages besides English and Afrikaans also academic languages, I think we need to look at it differently and look at all the role players within the institution and what it is that we as staff need to do and how we need to improve our own language diversity so that we can speak more than just our home language or whatever our strongest language is, and maybe another one that we were taught you know, at school as a compulsory language. So I don't think we are at that point yet. And for me, we are not addressing the multilingualism challenge if we don't focus on the staff as well. Thank you, people. This was very interesting, by the way. I really enjoyed being part of this forum today.
Thanks, Jeanette, for ruffling our feathers. I mean, it's easy for teachers to always be looking at how to fix, in inverted commas, the issue with students, but you are really pointing and shining the light on us as people who have agency to actually do something and do it within ourselves. So I think that's a really important question that you have posed. And I think it's something we can think about much more deeply going forward. Rudolph, Shamila, and then Nikki.
Hi, everybody. My comment is to pick up on what Jeanette has now mentioned, and also what Janet spoke about with the multilingual glossaries. We're fortunate in our department, architectural technology and interior design, that we've kind of inherited a bilingual glossary. I don't actually know where it originated from, but about 5 years ago, we did a project where we translated all the terminology from English and Afrikaans into isiXhosa too. And it was a challenging process. We were lucky that we had a lot of assistance from the language unit, and we drew on the language skills that staff had, Afrikaans speakers, isiXhosa speakers, to work with the students, and particularly for the isiXhosa group. It was a very long exercise because a lot of the technical terms had to be debated and made where there weren't any terms. So I think there's a value in the multilingual glossaries also in terms of developing indigenous languages for the specific disciplines to undo the hegemony of English in the academic disciplines. And then also the fact that with architecture being a visual discipline, we had students do graphics, diagrams, illustrations, which I think is very useful. I think that's probably the more than the language aspect, the visual aspect, being able to see something and then look up what the name is also quite valuable. I'm not sure how well that translates into other disciplines. But to round off what Janet said, is also true that it is a living document, and it needs to change as the students identify words or terms which are problematic. Ideally, you want to add those at the end of every year and rework the document to keep it updated.
Thanks, Rudolph. Shamila?
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity here this afternoon. I think, you know, we're all learning so much from this conversation, but I also wanted to add my voice to the discussion around the multilingual glossary. Our department in the business faculty, the HRM department, human resource management, we've been using, you know, the multilingual glossary, and we developed it about just over 2 years ago. And it's a work in progress, and as Rob said, you know, we keep adding to it, but the work in progress really came when we decided to make it visual, because, you know, especially with the content subjects, the hard terms that students have to learn, you know, in English, it's a second or third language. So it's helped a lot in that sense. But we've had to really look at and revisit it quite a number of times. Make it easier for our students to get to grips with the terms. And this is where the visual literacy has helped a lot. Where, for example, with Bloom's taxonomy, which is also in our glossary, we've now added a video, you know, a really simple, easy to understand and follow video, which has helped tremendously. And of course, the fact that we put online, upload Blackboard helps a lot in the sense to a hard copy version. It lends itself more to the visual. But I do believe, and first of all, that we've been doing this, but we do believe that there's a lot of room for improvement with the multilingual glossary is concerned, especially making it a real visual literacy tool that will help our students. And it's really a work in progress. So I think, that this kind of forum also allows us to get some ideas from each other. And perhaps at some point, we can actually make these glossaries available for each other to view, and it will certainly help a lot for us to be able to share those ideas around it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Shamila. Nikki?
Yes, thanks, colleagues. Shamila, it's so exciting listening, and other colleagues, to what you've been saying around trying to deal with these issues. And I think it's going to become even more difficult. For example, in the subject that I teach, which is theory, we from now on are going to be teaching online only, as far as I understand. And given that the fourth wave is imminent of the virus, that we might be starting next year online. So these are students coming into the university, into ECP, and we've got all of these online materials that are in English. So I'm wondering if there would be a way of us, we were discussing this actually in our team, of kind of almost subtitling the existing material, a project to work, I don't know how, to brainstorm with work with students. But I think your idea of sharing what we are all doing rather than being in our siloed departments would be so very useful. So yeah, just putting that out there.
Thanks, Nikki. That's a good point. I've just finished a study that was looking at lecturers' experiences with teaching multilingually online, and I mean it's quite devastating because of just the limitations that the online space poses to multilingual pedagogies. But this point that you're making around how the fact that you can now have text and audio presents an opportunity to be multilingual in like one product. So if you've got a video where you are speaking in Xhosa and have subtitles in English, and then maybe even have the accompanying notes in Afrikaans, that is one of the positives that this new way of teaching and learning has presented. So I think that is a point that is a bit of a light in a pretty dark situation. Amanda, did you want to add anything to the topic, to the question around glossaries? I personally haven't used the multilingual glossaries, and the reason for that is that my students don't go to them. So I'm not sure how to make them meaningful because they don't consult them out of their own initiative. So I don't have much experience on those. But Amanda or anybody else who still wants to speak to that?
Maybe, yeah, to say, I think to go back to what Renette was saying, I think they are there, but again, they are only limited to those terms which we have identified, and so glossaries are helpful, but one's approach also needs to be a little bit more nuanced, I think, in terms of responding to, the current situation or context that you find yourself in. And that's where I find utilizing what the students who are in the room have and are familiar with that quite valuable. So glossaries are valuable, definitely, because one can identify those key terms or threshold concepts that we as the academics know often, even in English, students struggle with. So I think they have a place and that they are valuable in that sense. But I think in terms of today's debate and also what Renette raised, that if I could in my broken, is it because I say in detail, is it because I know that I will never be able to speak to is it because a first language student in a way that, you know, that they would, let's say, speak at home or with their parent. But I also know that in acknowledging the language and even greeting someone in their mother tongue or saying anything, like if I speak and I can't find the word for something in class and I say don, that they laugh because it's, you know, it's almost funny that I know that that's something I can use. And so all of those little things, I think, even though I can't fluently string together a proper sentence, that all contributes to making our students feel like they are part of and not that they don't need to just assimilate into or who we are or into the university. So I think baby steps, yeah. And I think it is that we do need to make an effort as academics to acquire, even if, you know, we're saying a few words or we're saying Molweni Bantwana or whatever, you know, that acknowledgement is what's key.
Mm-hmm. I think you have hit the nail on the head, Amanda. For me, I think one of the most powerful consequences of a lecturer making an effort is that it shows students that different languages belong in the academic space. You know, the small steps where you try and bring in different languages in your classroom may not necessarily help them understand a concept, but it does provide a little more freedom for them to feel like they, as their whole being, as somebody who speaks this Xhosa from Queenstown, belongs in that space, and they can use their language to understand complicated concepts in journalism. So yeah, I think it definitely, the conversation around how we can equip ourselves as academics is one that probably needs to be prioritized, because a lot of what we're trying to do is vested maybe in us being the ones to stretch ourselves a little bit. So I know we have up until 2:30 for this session, but if there aren't any other comments or questions, Amanda, I don't know if you want to say anything else and round up. Otherwise, we can then close because load shedding is apparently starting or has started.
Just to say maybe around what Janet was raising around visual languages, and I think Shamila also touched on this, is that one of the other things that I also do in the same subject is we do collage. So even though it's academic and professional literacies, and we do collage around identity and how students see themselves within the university, because the nature of collage and the visual language transcends almost the verbal or the oral, the spoken word. So there are things that are communicated in the visual language which often they would find difficult if I asked them to write an essay on how they find university, how they see themselves in the university, how they see themselves as designers even within studying at university. So the like I said, you know, this 1 week, this is a glimpse into a larger curriculum in which I endeavor, and I mean, it's still very much experimental, but to find ways and means in which to create environments that are enabling, or not even enabling, I don't think that's the word, but that are inclusive and welcoming. I think welcoming is the right word, of the wide range and diverse range of things that we find. And then maybe just to say, and I said to Sisanda yesterday, I want to share this little picture because I think it's funny, but it's just, I think, something that often we forget. And so it's this idea of a glitterant, when you have the best intentions of using glitter in the classroom, but then an accident occurs making you deeply regret your choice. And it's this idea, this idea of that we enter our classroom with the best of intentions, and to sort of operate in the knowledge that it's okay, and I wouldn't say at the expense of students, but it's okay to fail sometimes. Or I don't know whether failure actually exists, because I think we learn an incredible amount even when things don't work out the way we thought it would. But I don't think it should stop us from challenging ourselves to transform as lecturers, and then also to transform our classrooms and our students' university experience by doing that.
Thanks so much, Amanda, and a big thank you to all of you colleagues for coming through and really just sharing. It has been very insightful, and I think we have all gained something that we can practically implement in our classrooms, if not in our classrooms, at the very least, maybe something we can implement within ourselves as teachers. So if you are monolingual, maybe thinking of how you can get started on learning another language. Thanks, Janet, for the opportunity to have done this. And I will then just end, or you can end the session on your end. Colleagues, have a good afternoon, and keep safe, and hopefully ESCOM doesn't hit you hard.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much,
Thank you,
Sisanda.
everybody. Bye.
Thank you, Amanda.
It was great.
Wonderful.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.